My father taught me that if someone asks for help, you help them. I like to think I listen to his words and live by them fairly well, but what happens when you don't help? What happens when you shouldn't? Day 1. Every year, my dad's work would have a father-son camping trip. We'd find a nice spot of wilderness and spend a weekend hanging out, learning how to do outdoorsy things. Just guys being dudes, being bros, being homies. It was the best. All right, Travis, my dad said with a slight quiver to his voice. The brakes. Hit the brakes! It was my first time driving, and to be honest, I wasn't doing so well. I was so nervous that I kept forgetting how to brake. Not the end of the world, except on the back mountain roads I was whipping us around at that moment. My dad pushed me to the side just in time. I could see the steep drop, and I briefly wondered what that fall might have felt like. Dad slammed on the brakes. My brother started crying, and I rubbed my neck. Sorry, Dad, I mumbled. Dad didn't really get mad. Almost ever. He wasn't a big show your emotions kind of guy. He took a deep breath and smiled. It's okay, bud. You're just not ready to drive yet. It shouldn't have bothered me, but I really wanted to start 6th grade by walking right up to Randy Pert's snobby face and say, I know how to drive too. He used to be my friend until he got too high and mighty by driving his mom's station wagon to the store. In a small town like that, tucked deep into the mountains of Montana, no one really cared that a 12-year-old was driving. If you didn't hurt anybody, who cares, right? Are we there yet? My brother asked now that we calmed down. Zach is a couple years younger than me, but I like spending these camping trips with him. I never admit that to him because, duh, but he is a good little brother. Actually, we are, my dad announced. We came around one more bend, and I saw the campsite, the woods all around, and the crystal-clear waters of Flathead Lake behind it. A path of switchback trails led from the campsite to the lake. It would be a pretty steep drop otherwise. As Dad parked the truck, I saw all of the other kids. Matt, Andy, and Benny. The whole gang was here. Matt's dad was unloading their four-wheelers. Benny's dad was putting a boat in the lake. And Andy's dad was setting crawfish traps. It looked like the beginning to a pretty awesome weekend. We jumped out and helped our dad set up our tents. The dads were all setting up their tents on the side closest to the lake while us kids had the mountain to our backs. I was showing off our new tent to the guys when a loud honk rang out behind us. Oh, no. Who told them about this? My dad said to the other grown-ups. Everyone shrugged. A couple of college guys skidded to a stop in front of us, kicking up dirt and dust. We all coughed as they jumped out of their Jeep. Well, 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 look what we have here, Buck, announced the man in a tie-dye bucket hat. He smelled kind of like a skunk, but it might have been roadkill on his car. What do we have, Chuck? Buck returned while jumping on the hood. He looked like an egg with a thin mustache. He blew a bubblegum bubble. When it popped, most of it ended up on his face. Benny laughed at him. Looks like a bunch of cool cats ready to party on the lake, Chuck proclaimed. He ran up to my dad, giving him a hug. Dad rolled his eyes, sighed, and hugged the guy back. You guys forgot to tell us directions to the campsite before leaving work yesterday. We've been blazing these trails all day looking for you. Chuck clapped the other dads on the back before returning to his car. He yanked the dirtiest backpack I've ever seen out of the trunk. It had bits of fur and blood spattered all over it. Something told me not to breathe too close to it. Buck bounced off the hood and cracked a soda. So where are we setting up our tents, boss? He belched so hard I thought his eyes would pop out. All the dads looked at each other and pointed at the kid's side. There. Buck looked at us, threw up a shaka, and said, sweat. He tossed each of us kids a soda, something I definitely wasn't allowed to drink often. I looked at my dad, my eyes wide, and he nodded with a grin. The first taste of this syrupy sweet heaven in a can put me in a state of total euphoria. I thought I could conquer the world, or at least a small village. The other kids, though, went feral. Their first taste must have summoned a god of war because they chugged their cans and started running everywhere. The dads looked defeated already, but they tried to channel the energy towards the lake. Didn't take much convincing. The other boys ran as fast as they could, jumped in fully clothed, and thus started our weekend on the lake. It wasn't long before we were sitting around the fire. The moon rose behind us over the ridges of the mountain. I remember my science teacher telling us that when the moon is growing fuller, it's called waxing. The waxing moon looked almost full tonight, and its light made the water of the lake shimmer. We ate s'mores, roasted hot dogs, and sang songs. Chuck and Buck annoyed Andy's dad with their burping contest. Andy was crashing hard from the soda. He kept almost falling into the fire. Man, it was awesome. You guys want to hear a ghost story? Chuck asked. The moonlight and fire played a macabre dance across his face, making him look deadly serious and half insane. Benny's dad said, I don't know if they're ready for ghost stories, guys. All of us kids complained, even Benny, whose knees were shaking already at the thought of a spooky story. Fine, but nothing too graphic. Chuck laughed like a hyena into the night. Of course not. He leaned in closer to the fire, raising one eyebrow. Have you ever heard of the monster? Flathead Lake. We all shook our heads while Benny shook his knees even harder. Well, it's a monster older than time. It scratches the trees around here to let us know to be careful in its territory. It howls sometimes too, but most importantly, it looks like roar. Something roared in my ear and grabbed me by the shoulders. All the kids screamed. The dads jumped up. Buck whipped me around as he laughed. Oh man, you should see your face. My dad whacked the two boys across the head. That's enough of that. You scare the kids half to death. They won't sleep at all tonight, he scolded them. They put their heads down and mumbled an apology, but it was overshadowed by Andy falling off his stump while snoring. Everyone laughed as Andy's dad took him to his tent. Okay, guys, my dad said, it's time to hit the sack. Even if you can't sleep, he glared at the college brothers, no leaving your tent. If you hear something scratching around, it's probably a raccoon, because, he prompted Chuck to finish the sentence. He sighed long and loud. There's no such thing as monsters. That's right. Now go. I had crawled into my sleeping bag, watching my brother for a moment, and listened to the sounds of the woods. I didn't want to admit it at the time, but I was scared. I was scared before Buck roared behind me. These woods felt big, and I didn't think we were alone. Travis, help me. I heard a tiny voice from behind my tent. Travis, help me. It sounded like my brother. Must have gone to the bathroom and can't find his way back, I thought, stretching and rolling to a seated position. I heard snoring. I looked to my right. My brother was sound asleep. He didn't snore loud, but definitely enough. Huh? Weird. Must have been a dream, I muttered to myself before crawling back in my bag. I fell asleep pretty quick, but I remember hearing that voice one last time before my sweet slumber overtook me. Day 2. Tag! Benny yelled, slapping me on the back. You're it! He ran off in the woods. I chased after all of my friends. It was a beautiful morning. The sun was out, our dads were making eggs and bacon for breakfast, and us dudes were running as fast as we could. It was a good life. Slow down, guys, I laughed. I'll never catch you at this point. I saw Andy dart behind the tents, running toward the mountains. He felt like my best target. As I closed in, he bolted away. Crack! Something sounded like a tree splitting, but worse. Andy screamed so loud I thought my ears would bleed. That's when I saw him, lying on the ground, clutching his leg. He snapped his ankle on something and fell. Andy! Andy's dad came around the corner. Travis, what happened? He didn't look mad, just worried. He tried to calm Andy as best he could. I blanched. I don't know. He tripped on something. I looked around and saw a set of massive paw prints in the ground that exposed some loose roots. Huh? I explored back here yesterday and didn't see anything like this. Probably that. Andy's dad picked up his son and ran to the car. He said something about taking him to the hospital. My dad promised him he'd bring his gear back to the store next week. It was all over so fast. I felt terrible for chasing Andy into the paw print. I sat alone on a stump by the fire while everyone else kept having fun. My dad came over. I'm so sorry, Dad. I didn't mean to. No, that wasn't your fault, Trev, he said. I usually believe my dad, but this felt a lot like it was my fault. I know you're the big kid out here, but you're not responsible for what happens to these other kids. We watched Chuck and Buck play catch with Benny, and by that I mean they used Benny as a beach ball and tossed him as high as they could at each other. Well, they'll be responsible for him if he falls. I laughed. You're right. Thanks, Dad. I still felt guilty, but I knew he was at least somewhat right. I didn't leave that paw print in the woods. Hey, what kind of animal could leave that? It was huge. My dad's forehead scrunched up and he looked away. He didn't say anything for a while. A voice behind me spooked me. It could have been the monster. Chuck and Buck were done giving Benny vertigo. My dad whacked them with his hat. Boys, I told you to stop scaring the kids. Buck laughed. We're just saying it could have been, right? It was trying to mark its territory. The boys ran away as my dad chased them off. We all giggled at the sight of the two goofy, mostly adults running from the dads. Benny's dad threw a water gun to my dad, who soaked the brothers until they screamed for mercy. Dad came back, scruffling my hair. Listen, bud, you're fine. And there's no such thing as a monster. I nodded. There's no such thing as a monster. There's no such thing. We spent the rest of the day on the lake, fishing, swimming, tubing behind the boat. At one point, I caught so much air that when I hit the water, I thought I bruised my tailbone. It was still a good day, even though we missed Andy a lot. We promised to make him a get-well-soon card when we got back to town. The fire that night was even better with the moon almost to full. Our dads even let us tell our own spooky stories. They wouldn't let Chuck or Buck say a word about their monster. Zach told a story about a bathtub that would eat your rubber duckies. He was notorious for his long baths and his tactical war stories of the rubber ducks. Matt told us about the ghost that lived in the store's attic. There is no attic, his dad said. They don't know that, Dad, he whispered back, and I told a story about a monster that wakes you up by sounding like others. I felt a little happy seeing Benny's knees shaking almost as much as Chuck and Buck's monster story. At the end of my story, the dads all walked off to take care of stuff. The college boys leaned toward us, the moon and firelight painting their faces in wild color. So, you want to hear the rest of the legend? Benny stuttered. Whoa, what legend? Buck walked around trying to spook us. You know, the monster of Flathead Lake. Benny pulled his knees to his chest to stop them from shaking more, because the monster is real, and it's hungry. Do you know what the monster likes to eat, Chuck? I don't, he said. What does it like to eat, Buck? Buck creeped around the circle of us until the moon was at his back, bathing us in a large shadow. The fear of little children. Roar! He bellowed before running at us. Whack, whack! My dad hit the two brothers again and again. Not hard, but enough to let them know they messed up. You two goons need to stop, or I'll cut your hours. That seemed to do the trick. Both of them gulped, looked at each other, and fell to their knees. We're sorry, they cried. We'll change our children's scaring ways, they wailed. I laughed at the sight, but I saw Zach, my sweet little brother, shivering in the moonlight. What's wrong, Zach? You okay? While the adults were busy scolding Chuck and Buck, Zach looked at us with terror in his eyes. Guys, does the monster eat us when it knows we're scared? How does it know if we're scared? I've been scared since we got here. What if it eats me? I hugged my little brother tight. My dad whacked the older brothers one more time. See what you did? You got them thinking a monster's coming out to eat them. They mumbled a few more apologies as my dad picked up my brother. Don't worry, boys. Us dads were talking, and we're going to move our tents closer to yours so nothing bad will happen. But, Dad, there's no such thing as monsters. We'll be fine, right? I was trying to sound brave, but honestly, I was pretty glad Dad was moving closer to us. Whatever left that paw print last night might still be out there. Wait a minute. Dad, are you worried about the animal that was behind our tents last night? Dad wasn't much for showing emotions, but he couldn't hide the answer from his eyes. He was worried about something, and he wasn't saying what it was. Just don't leave your tents tonight, okay, boys? Sleep hit fast and hard that night. The adrenaline of Andy, the lake, and the ghost stories helped us all crash as soon as our heads touched our pillows. I was having dreams about rubber ducks and attics chasing me around my dad's store. Travis, help me. My dad's voice echoed into my brain. I woke up, rubbing my eyes. Travis, help me. He sounded like he was by the fire. I was so groggy I didn't even think. I put my shoes on while yawning. As I started to unzip the tent, I heard my dad's voice in the tent next to me. Travis, Zach, what are you doing? Go back to sleep. Huh? You just asked me to help you, I argued. What? You can help me by going back to sleep. Whatever, Dad. I zipped the tent up. I listened to the wind blow gently through the trees, and I heard the voice whisper in the wind, Travis, help me, one last time as I fell asleep. Day 3. I woke up before the other kids. I could hear the adults whispering by the fire. What could it be? The thing's massive. That sounded like Matt's dad. I already cleaned up the other tracks, but we should really take a picture of this for the university. They might want to research it, Benny's dad said. Fine, but do it fast. I don't want the kids to get more scared than they already are, my dad whispered just loud enough for me to hear. I'm already thinking of cutting this trip short. I unzipped my tent as Benny's dad took a picture of the paw print. Matt's dad started swiping it away with his foot when he heard me. I pretended not to hear them. Parents love that, but I think my dad knew. He knew more than he was telling. We spent the morning on the four-wheelers, zipping through the trails. After lunch, we jumped back on the boat in tubes and enjoyed the water. It was a pretty great day, especially because no one hurt themselves. Yet. After Zach and I caught some great air on the waves and swallowed more lake water than our mom or stomachs would be comfortable with, Benny wanted his turn. He was holding on with all of his might. I could see him smiling and laughing, enjoying the breeze through his hair. Chuck and Buck took over steering the boat for a while. Buck yelled back to Benny, "Want to catch some air, bud?" He yelled back, but we couldn't hear him. His smile was enough of an answer. The brothers had made Benny their adoptive littlest brother. He really looked up to them. "Be careful, guys," Benny's dad said. "He's a tough kid, but he's still little." In truth, Chuck and Buck weren't even driving the boat that fast. What happened next wasn't their fault, but still... Benny caught the lip of a wave at just the right angle that turned the tube into something of a kite. He went sailing through the air, the tube fell away from him, and he hit the water. Hard. We pulled him out of the water. His arm looked all weird and twisted. He screamed in pain the whole way back to shore. My dad and Matt's dad had to hold Benny's dad back from beating the life out of Chuck and Buck. His rage didn't last long. I think he knew it wasn't really their fault, and if you could see the looks on their faces, you know how bad they felt. Between his cries, Benny told the two it was okay, that it wasn't their fault. They looked like me yesterday, but worse. Benny's dad took his son to the hospital. My dad promised to bring his stuff back to the store, just like he did with Andy's dad. Matt, Zach, and I played card games while the adults tried to help Chuck and Buck feel better. I heard them talking about how they were really happy to have joined us, that they were feeling like older brothers to us. I'd agree with that too. They were weird, wacky, and probably a little too wild for us sometimes, but they were nice, happy, cool guys. I hope they didn't get in trouble at the store for this. We were eating our s'mores in the dusk light when my dad said, "Maybe we should leave tonight. We don't need to stay out here another night, huh?" All of us kids whined until he put his hands up. "Fine, fine. I wasn't sure you guys want to be here after watching two of your friends get really hurt. But if you want to leave in the morning, that's fine. Let's just be really careful, all right?" Chuck and Buck looked so sad across the fire. They were barely eating their s'mores and hot dogs. I knew what would cheer them up. "Hey, guys, do you want to tell us a less scary version of the monster of Flathead Lake?" My dad looked at me with appreciation. He knew what I was doing. My brother grabbed my arm. "Don't worry, it won't be scary." Chuck looked at his brother and said, "You know how the monster feeds on the fear of children?" My dad tilted his head in warning at them. Chuck nodded with a thumbs up like, "It's okay. I got this." Buck laughed a little. "Yeah, it does. Well, it also farts rainbows." All of us laughed. "And that's why it isn't that scary of a monster after all." We all clapped. Zach was still shivering. "But there's still a monster?" My dad hugged my brother to his side. "Now, Zach, don't worry. There's no such thing as a..." Over the ridge, with the full moon rising above its peaks, what sounded like a mix of a wolf, coyote, and bear rang out through the night. All the men stood up and put themselves between the thing and us. We couldn't see any creatures. It must be over the hill. "Travis," my dad said, using my full name for the first time without being upset at me in a year. He kept scanning the tree line. "Go to the truck. Take your brother." I didn't need any convincing. Dad was right behind us as I pushed my brother into his seat, helping him with the seatbelt. The other guys were jumping into their vehicles as well. "Dad," I asked. He was trying to start the truck. "There's no such thing as monsters, right?" Ch-ch, ch-ch. The engine wasn't starting. Matt's dad ran over to us with Matt in his arms. He put his son in the seat next to me. "Hey, our truck isn't working. Can we ride with you?" he asked. My dad shook his head, showing the key in the ignition not working. Chuck and Buck ran over to say their Jeep was doing the same thing. My dad got out, reached into the box in the bed of the truck, and pulled out 2 rifles. He handed one to Matt's dad. He gave the college kids flashlights. "Chuck, you're with me. Buck, go with him. We're going to investigate this thing. It's probably nothing." No one believed him. My brother's shivers were almost as bad as Benny's knees now. Even Matt, a pretty dependable kid in a crisis, was shaking too. Buck and Matt's dad went off to the right. My dad turned towards me. "Travis, I need your help. You're in charge now." The words hit me harder than Benny did the lake. I'm responsible for them now. "I know you don't know how to drive well yet, but I want you to try starting the truck every now and then. If it works and you don't see us for a while, I want you to go for help. Understand me?" I nodded. "Good. Now turn on the lights and wait for us." Chuck and Dad went to the left. The pairs walked up the mountain paths, cresting the hill. The moon was fully over the ridge now, bathing us in its light. The headlights illuminated the shadows it left from the trees. "Trav, my dad told me the rest of the story," Matt said, his voice wavering. "He said the monster sometimes looks like a wolf, and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it sounds like an animal, and sometimes it doesn't. He said, boom!" A rifle shot blared on the other side of the hill. I could hear the men screaming. I could hear them rushing back towards us. On the left, I saw my dad's face as well as the limp form of Chuck on his shoulder. I couldn't see much else, just a lot of blood. I whipped my eyes to the right. I saw Matt's dad and Buck running for their lives, terror on their faces. I saw my dad's face as well. It was smiling and running towards the pair. "Travis, start the truck. Get out of here," my dad on the left demanded. "Travis, help me," my dad on the right pleaded. I tried starting the truck. Ch-ch. My brother started to cry. Matt locked the doors. They were getting closer to the point where I could see them better. On the left, I saw my dad, uninjured. Chuck looked alive but really hurt. His arm dangled by his side. My dad raised his rifle at his clone on the right and shot. My creepy smile dad was about to grab onto Buck when the shot hit him, barreling him into a tree. "Travis, get out of here!" my dad, who just shot, yelled. My creepy smile, now shot dad, shook himself before looking at me with a smile. "Travis, help me." Matt's dad and Buck kept running as the headlights illuminated the thing on the right with the face of my dad. It definitely still had his face, albeit smiling a wicked grin with the sharpest fangs I'd ever seen. But the rest of his body, from the shoulders down, was that of a giant wolf. It had gnarly claws that could tear any tree down with one swing. It looked hungrily at my father. It bolted in his direction. Ch-ch. It wouldn't be long until it reached him. Ch-ch. Its fangs and claws glinted in the moonlight. Car started. "Zach, hit the gas," I yelled. My brother stopped crying the moment he knew I needed help. He threw his whole body on the gas pedal. He pounded that thing into the floor. The monster reached out his terrible claws to slice my dad in half, but it wasn't fast enough. Whack! The truck wailed into it and sped towards that cliff overlooking the beautiful lake. "Oh my God, Zach! The brakes! Hit the brakes!" Zach tossed his body onto the brakes and the truck skidded towards the edge. The monster went sailing through the air like poor Benny did, but from a terrifying and hopefully lethal distance. I watched its terrible eyes, fangs and claws whistle through the air toward the lake. Its smile never dissipated. It didn't look hurt at all. I heard its voice one last time. "Travis, help me." My dad hugged me before taking over the driver's seat. He had the other guys jump in the bed of the truck before taking off down those mountain roads. We wound around the lake. My eyes were glued to where I watched the monster sink beneath the water, its sickening smile still locked on me in the depths of the lake.